All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Write the Docs Bay Area's October event, a roundtable for tech writers who are new to the field. My name is Lenny Chen, and I'm your host for this event. Before I start, I'd like to give some shout outs. First to our logistics lead for this event, Betsy. Not only is she the logistics lead, this theme was actually her idea to begin with. So she really is our MVP tonight. And a shout out to Tina, who will be taking notes throughout the event and aggregate resources we mentioned today, and we'll send it out at the end of the event to all who RSVP'd. Also Maggie, who we pulled out of retirement to help with this event. And Alyssa, who is one of the higher ups, honestly, that's how I recognized her. She'll be taking over the event during the open source section. And all the other organizers, Liz, Deborah, and Clarence, every Write the Docs event is a team effort, and we all come up with ideas on how to run the event. So shout out to everyone. Here's the agenda for today. From 7 to 10 is social networking. Unfortunately, that has already happened. It's in the past. There's no more playtime, but that's okay because the rest of the event is equally fun. So right now we are at the announcement stage. First announcement is the rules for tonight's event. The rules are simple. We have 5 topics. First job, API documentation, open source contribution, staying current with in-demand technology, and compensation negotiation. Each event, each topic is allotted around 9 minutes. So you ask your question in the Zoom chat. We pick a question in the order they're received, and anyone can chime in to answer them. In the interest of time, I will be probably pretty strict about our time constraints. So if I cut you off in the middle of an answer, which I will try not to do, it's not personal. If I do that to you, please don't blacklist me from applying for a job at your company or something. I just want to make sure that we all cover all the topics, which also I'm not looking for jobs right now, just in case my current employer sees this. Because that was just a blank disclaimer for comedic purposes. We will not be muting people in this event because usually it's our experience that people are civil and won't be interrupting each other. At the end, we will, as I said before, we will aggregate the resources in a Google Doc, send to all the attendees. We will also be publishing them on our website. The second announcement is that Write the Docs is always looking for volunteers. Working with us is fun. You get to make great connections, and if you're like me, or you get to jumpstart your career in stand-up comedy or something like that. Which also I'm not trying to do. But on a serious note, if you want to join us or are interested, feel free to message me or any of the other organizers. Just I think a couple months ago, I was one of those people. I messaged Liz and I was like, "Can I do this? I'm very, very new. So if you have the same concerns, don't worry. If I can do it, you can do it." All right, that's enough of me talking. Let's jump into the main event, the roundtable. So we'll get started with our first topic, which is first job, first technical writing job. So please ask your questions in the Zoom chat. It can be regarding anything about the first job, both getting the job to begin with and doing the work on the first job.
A small note on the questions front. If you submitted a question when we had asked for topics earlier, then those have been pulled into our list automatically, and you don't need to ask that same question again here. So your questions have already been accounted for if they were submitted earlier, and then we will be sucking in all of your new questions from here to gather as many as possible.
Yes, yeah. So the first question asked by Ash that we got before is, are there any tips and tricks for new technical writers to excel at their job? Anyone want to pick that one?
want everybody to talk at once. I think one of the most important things as a new technical writer is to stay curious and to start by learning the product that you're working on. If you don't know how things work and you're hoping to just float by on the explanations that you get piecemeal from developers or from product leads as you're working on the documentation, then you'll never have a holistic enough approach to the product to really explain it super well. And so investing upfront in learning that product and staying curious as new things are added and as you learn more about the field is going to pay huge, huge dividends over time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that is so important. Oh yeah, sorry, you were gonna, Anu.
So this is Anu. Another thing is, I guess, get some sort of certification at least, if not, if you don't already have a degree in communications or something, getting one of the major certifications might be helpful, right? I'm actually working on certification from the STC. What is it? Something or other, something to do with communications.
But technical communications?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. I just remembered the acronym and nothing more. So, yeah, I think some sort of certification like that might be useful. I don't know. I think I saw a question down there about what about actual technical writing certification, like you get at the UW or university level or even community college.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Our next question is actually just about that. Are technical writing certificates worth it?
I would not know.
Yeah, do people have like I personally don't have a technical writing certificate.
Ooh.
Charlene, I see you in the chat
Charlene,
too.
yes.
Maybe you want to talk to me.
Yeah, I was new to Seattle. I moved here in 2014 and I didn't know what to do. So I went to UW. I took the tech writing cert, which was about 9 months long. And I finished it, and straight away I got hired on by Nintendo here to do technical translation. And it is through that I met Lenny here, because he's also from the localization background. So I think the certificate is good in the sense when you don't have a starting point, it's a good way to, when you do the projects, it gives you some kind of sample writing to provide. And also when you're in the program for 9 months, you meet a lot of other tech writers and then start building your network. So I think there's a lot of value in that. Although now everything is virtual, so it becomes a little bit harder to network, I think.
Yeah, it does become harder to network because if you haven't already met people in person, it's weird to talk on the, the phone or on video. At least to me, it's weird. Plus,
yeah, I was actually wondering if there's anyone who has been like who's hired technical writers and like how much weight they put on the certificates if they ever saw one. I wonder if there's anyone who can provide a perspective like that.
Yeah. In fact, Hi, I'm Laura and I work for Expert Support. So I'm not a tech writer. We hire tech writers. And yes, that is something. If I'm looking at somebody who has very little or no experience, I absolutely will put value on some type of tech writing certificate, especially because of what somebody else just mentioned about, we always need to evaluate samples before we'll hire anybody. So if they have a tech writing certificate, that also will help them generate maybe some samples and some kind of a portfolio. But so yes, we do put some value on it when somebody doesn't have experience.
And what about mid, if you've kind of fallen into technical writing, that I've done for over 20 years, but never as officially a tech writer. I wonder, would you, I don't know. I'm just curious. I would love to listen to anybody else. And I'm going to mute myself so I don't keep talking.
Lenny, you asked for people who had recently hired a technical writer and whether a certification mattered. I was on a panel of people helping select a new technical writer for my company. And different employers and different people making hiring decisions might have different values or things they're looking for in a candidate. But my manager did want to see some technical writing training for this role that we were looking in. We were debating between two candidates. Both of them had equal educational opportunities, or like they both had like their master's in English, but one had a technical writing degree. But we were able to advocate for the candidate that we ended up going with because she had the STC, Society for Technical Communicators, certificate. So those two candidates were equal for us, one who had a degree in technical writing and one who had just plain English degrees, but an STC certification on top of it. So that was equal to us.
Great. Yeah, I think it's good to hear that these certifications hold some weight. So like it's probably it could be a good starting point for you if you like don't have formal technical writing training. Good. So our next question is by Andrew, and it's technical writing versus technical content writing. Actually, yeah, I actually don't really know like if there what the difference this would, if there is a difference between technical content writing and technical writing. Would anyone like to chime in on this one? Technical writing versus technical content writing.
I could make an educated guess if no one else is an expert on this. I think that technical content writing also resorts to other things like writing white papers, I guess, or maybe also very technical content that's used in sales probably. But I've seen that Margaret can probably share about this. So let's hear it from Margaret.
Sure. I was honestly kind of hoping that Andrew, who had asked this question, would be here with us tonight. He often attends, and I was hoping he could like narrow the scope of this a little bit. But generally, I think he was hoping that we would talk about some of the differences between technical writing and technical content writing, where technical content writing is, as Tina said, a much more general bucket. Technical content writing can be any kind of technical content, whereas technical writing tends to be specifically that information about how to interact with a product or a piece of software. Most of us are working on software products rather than like physical products. And so for us, it's often going to look like the procedures in the manual and the glossary and the general conceptual documentation that you want to provide before the procedures. Whereas when you get into technical content writing, you're going to have a lot more things like technical blog posts, and that's often more a component of a lot of technical writing roles now than it was previously. But I'm not sure which way he was hoping us to go on that, whether he wanted us to talk about the importance of building it or the importance of providing samples that fall to one side or the other. I know that he's coming in from a recruitment perspective, and so it's probably something about how the difference between these two terms affects your applications for jobs, but I don't know what specifically he would have wanted us to go for there.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, since he's not here, maybe we should just move on to the next question. Let's do one last question for this topic. We're kind of on time. So the next question is, how do you prioritize with so many tasks to spend your time on? Balancing communication with engineers, issues of various priorities, research, tooling changes, and creating content can be tricky. Yeah, I mean, I definitely size. Yeah, anyone want to provide some perspective on prioritization? I mean, I can maybe like share some of my experience to start with. I definitely feel like sometimes my time is split between like so many different things, especially like if you as like a lone writer, like as the only writer at the company, they're like all the teams, whenever they need documentation, like they will come to you. And I think you kind of really need to use your judgment, first of all, to decide like which one is the most important. Like if the product is going to be released like in a week, then obviously you should be working on release notes. And like when it comes to how much time you should spend researching and how much time you should spend like communicating with other people, I think that's just a matter of like how you try ahead, how you keep up with the things that's like constantly. I think it's harder for you to like rank everything in importance, but it's less hard to always be able to find the most important thing on top of your list. So if you're getting really lost, maybe you can start like what's the most important thing right now, and that can help you find like what the next thing that you're going to do. Anyone else wanted to share their experience?
I can share something that I found helpful. I learned that during an internship, basically for also like day-to-day planning, but you can probably also use it for weekly planning for what you have to do. I found it helpful to have basically 2 cards prepared. One of them is a card for meetings and meeting times. Basically, these are external tasks that you have to do, or it's useful to attend them, for example, sprint meetings. And then the remainder of your time, for example, if you're working full time and you're working 40 hours in a week, 8 hours a day, you try to plan out 6 hours of your day with the tasks that are the most important. For example, that can be 3 things, maybe planning a user research session, writing an important email, stuff like that. And by only planning with 6 hours, you make sure that you always have time to also have an overflow, basically, because things will take longer than you anticipate. And I found that pretty good. So this is just like in a very small perspective, but on a larger scale, like planning out the content development lifecycle, for example, that's something, if you're not a lone writer, you can do together with your team, because I think that's helpful for the whole organization to have some guidelines for how the process works, right? Because if there's no process, everything's gonna be messy. And if you are a sole writer, make sure you get educated on things like content strategy and this kind of content lifecycle, which is similar in all sorts of companies. And I think a lot of that has been written down in blogs, also magazines, and a lot of those magazines, for example, I linked in the document that I'm sharing with everyone afterwards. So it's really helpful to have a look at those magazines, for example.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that perspective. We're going to move on to our next topic, which is API documentation, a hot topic. And our first question is, how can experienced tech writers learn how to do API documentation? Yeah, anyone who have seen like other people, other coworkers, candidates who like pivot from like a traditionally like who haven't done API documentation before.
I'm looking for a link right now, and this is a book that was released very recently, which might be a good starting point.
So with API documentation, I think somebody without a technical background people tend to at least try a little bit of programming, learn some of the concepts at least, so that they're able to understand and talk with developers without, I guess, without putting them to sleep. I've had some technical, I've led teams where the technical writer was so completely ignorant of anything technical that it was very hard to get to make them understand. And half the time I ended up writing the document myself.
Yeah, so try some programming. I think that's a good idea, like especially I think with API documentation. I guess like API is a very broad term. Like a lot of the time I think when we say API documentation, it's like very specific REST API. Or I mean, I think there was a discussion in the Slack channel recently about like what is API. Yeah, but like I think especially like just with the REST API, like it's helpful to like know like the process of an HTTP request, and that like you to be more informed in writing about the API.
Exactly. Please know the basics of how the internet works, how the World Wide Web works, and what's the general process in terms of the simplest programming to get to and get things back from a web page. You're right. And another thing is that if you're mid-career or senior even, if you're switching to technical writing from, say, programming like I am, it might be useful to also kind of wander into business analysis land and learn those techniques, because as far as I'm concerned, a technical writer is a business analyst and a good writer. So that's just one thing you might want to keep in mind.
I linked also the Tom Johnson course from I'dRatherBeWriting.com on learning to document APIs. That's always been a very popular one. It's primarily written focused. So there are a lot of procedures. There are technical writing things that might be familiar to you as a technical writer, and it builds off of a basis of expecting you to already know probably more about documentation than APIs, along with some exercises to get you used to using APIs, have you put some requests into some free APIs, practice working with them, and kind of going through in the same way that you would test one of your organization's APIs if you were working on a real one you needed to document. And then as you go through, it builds on those concepts to expand out until you are ready to write descriptions of what the API does and kind of familiar with the general structures of an API.
I find important the question of why the API. Why would you use our API? That sort of thing too.
Cool. Yeah, any more API documentation questions? I mean, like actually I have one that I wanted to ask. So does anyone have had the how do you navigate bring like your API documentation that you sort of just like write, it's like in plain text, into using like open API specification, like into having a YAML file, govern it all? Like what's the best way to convince your organization to start doing that? I wonder if anyone has had the experience. I wish Deborah was here. I think she.
So I don't want to like keep talking, but when I've done this, a key factor in it has been selling the organization on the ability to track changes and for more people to participate actively in the creation of that documentation. So if you have a plain text API doc and it's maybe in Confluence or like Even worse, it's in an authoring tool where the developers can't get to it at all, or it's on somebody's computer in a Word document or something like that, then you can't have the degree of involvement from developers in the documentation that you can have if you're using something like OpenAPI that can be integrated into the IDE, and where the developers can see that documentation alongside the place that they're making the changes. So then the technical writers can act as more of like an editor and a curator versus having to figure out what exactly has changed and when manually. And so I've not really seen anyone successfully do it without an appeal to organizational efficiency. And it feels really cynical when you're doing it, but it does work and it does make things more efficient and it makes everything more pleasant for everyone.
Yeah. Cool. I think we can, we're kind of like short on time. Let's move on to the next topic. If we have time, we can circle back to API documentation. So the next topic is open source contribution. So this section, Alyssa will be taking over and hosting. So I'll just give the mic to her metaphorically, virtually.
All right. A couple of quick programming notes. First off, shout out to Edith. Edith is going to be joining me in this segment, speaking to her experience contributing to open source. So thank you for joining me, Edith. I appreciate it. And I am actually going to kind of facilitate a discussion using questions I've prepared and throw it out to the rest of you to maybe answer these questions. But if we don't get any feedback or discussion on some of those topics, then Edith and I can jump in and give some answers to some of those questions. But let me start by giving a quick bio and a teaser for why we're having this segment in this part of the meetup. So my name is Elisa Rock, and one of the reasons I'm talking to you is because I have heavy involvement in two different open source projects. One open source project is what I do for my day job, and one is one that I'm heavily involved in as my after work community service project. And I can talk more about those projects in a moment. You notice I'm not giving their names. We'll give names at the end. In fact, Lenny, just so you know, Lenny is going to let me know when I have a couple minutes at the end so that we can start naming some great projects to contribute to. So if you have a great project that you want to plug, keep in mind that we'll give you an opportunity to plug it at the end. But anyway, so to start out, I want to share a success story about open source for a new technical writer or somebody starting out in the field. So I work as a technical writer for a large company, VMware, and my product team decided to recently hire a new technical writer. We had over 250 applicants. It was a lot, but the applicant that got the job was somebody that I knew through my volunteer open source community. And she got the job because I was able to speak to the quality of her work personally. And by working with her through my open source project, I could recommend her confidently to my employer. I wasn't the only one making the decision about whether to hire her, but that open source experience is what kind of helps her get her foot in the door and help her get hired. So that's why this segment I think is relevant to new technical writers, is that it is yet another path. In addition to things like getting a degree and certification, it's another great path for getting into this profession. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask my first question, just in case some of the attendees who are here are not aware, because there might be a few people. What is open source software? Does anybody want to toss out a loose definition? And if it helps, you could maybe give a couple of examples of recognizable open source projects that maybe some people have heard of. So what is open source software? Who wants to jump in?
Software whose source code is public.
Yeah, I would agree. Can anybody name any interesting open source projects that you've heard of? Oh, someone in the chat said Mozilla. That's a great example. If you've ever used Firefox, the web browser, that is definitely an open source project, and they have lots of other product offerings in addition to that web browser, but that's a great example. And yeah, so that's basically what open source is. It's any kind of project. It doesn't have to just be software. It's any kind of project where Anybody can join and volunteer and contribute to the project. Usually it means open source software, but Edith, is there anything you want to add to my definition?
So like open source is really about the source being open. That means like you can read the code, you can produce the binary from the code, like the application itself. It doesn't necessarily mean that it can still be like paying software. I mean, you can have like, because like sometimes people get confused with like, but does it mean that it's free or not? And it's like there's a lot of different concepts and like about this when we speak of open source software. So you can have like a business that decides to open source their code, and have different version, maybe like different licensing around this, and then it gets complicated, of course. But like roughly, it means what we said. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes in fact, a lot of times the people who do contribute to open source projects could be paid and some could be volunteer. So you might have an interesting mix of things like that. And yes, in the chat, Linux is another, it's the example of open source software, really, the one that became the most famous first. So all right, next question is, what positive benefits can come to a new technical writer who plans to volunteer for an open source project? What are some things that a new technical writer can gain from contributing to an open source project? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, like I think, yeah, a portfolio, I think also allows you to learn if you didn't know before. Learn how to use Git, how to collaborate with other people. You have like a good track record of contributing to repositories on GitHub. Is also a good sign whenever you present that to a potential employer.
Yeah, 100%. And Steve in the chat also said a portfolio. That's definitely a big part of it. For me, I feel like there's two ways in which contributing to an open source project can help a new technical writer. One, yes, definitely building a portfolio, along with that building work experience that you can definitely show to an employer to say, look, I have tangible experience, I've contributed to something, and it shows I can work on a team, collaboratively on a project, which is all really important to getting your first job. And you're also building out your social network. So those are things that are very important to getting that first job. Anything else anybody wants to add about how it's valuable for somebody who wants to break into the field contributing to open source?
One thing that I usually say to people, especially people from like more developer background, like software developer background, is that would want to have that become technical writers, is that writing the docs is a great way to learn the tool in some way, or to really learn the tool. Like maybe you're like, I was familiar with Python as a programming language for many years, and then I started writing on the translating the Python docs to French, and then like some things re-clicked more, like some things just clicked more afterwards. I was just like, okay, now this makes more sense. Now I kind of get it more.
100%. And documentation is one of the most important, it's one of the easiest contributions you can make to a project, and also one that will be the most helpful both to you learning the technology, and also to people coming after you who also want to learn the technology. And there's just a strong need for technical writers in open source. So there's lots of places where you can contribute as a technical writer. So thanks, Edith. I appreciate that. All right. Let's see. So last question, and then we'll let everybody plug their project. After you found a community that you want to contribute to, or a project that you want to contribute to, What should you do next? What's some of the knowledge that you need about tools or people or processes, or how do you get started with an open source project? Does anybody have any insights on that?
Rules for contributors.
What was that, Anu?
Rules for contributing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So read the README, read the contributing guide, join any meetings where you can talk to collaborators, figure out where you can talk to the people working on the project and talk to them. But yeah, totally read the contributing guide, stuff like that. And if you're reading the contributing guide and it's not helpful, hey, that's a great place to make your first contribution. So yeah, Edith, how did you get involved in open source originally?
Like for the docs, you mean?
Yeah,
or in
yeah.
general, or both? For the docs, we wanted to do like some sort of like general sprint at Montreal Python, and one of our team members said like, well, we could work on translating the docs. There's a translation docs efforts. Let's do this. And this is how we got started. This is how we all got started translating the docs. We contributed to the to the ongoing translation effort. And this is how I got started writing docs also. And it's also a great way, like if you're looking to learn like developer tools, like version control tools, let's say, it's a good way to get some actual practice using them.
Totally. And what's nice about open source is people are willing to mentor you and help you along the way, and they'll be very patient with you as long as you're making a good contribution and you're making an investment in their community. So all right, so now we've reached the part where if you would like to plug a project, what is a good project that a new technical writer can volunteer for? I will plug my project in just a moment, but I want to let other people plug their projects first. Any projects you want to say this has been awesome to contribute to?
I can go first.
Go ahead.
I have to say, I really like contributing to the translation docs effort that I've already talked about for the Python docs, like the official documentation of Python, the programming language. Like a lot of times in open source software projects, like people will say like, I came for the software and I stayed for the community. And I believe that this is like true for my specific case with Python and the translation teams. It doesn't have to be like, I mean, there's a lot of translation efforts in many different open source projects and their documentation. So like, I would definitely encourage you to look for one that suits you.
Definitely. One other thing on that, in the Write the Docs Slack workspace, we have a couple of channels devoted to open source and volunteering for open source. One of them is called Open Source. You can join that one. Or there's also Community Help Wanted, which also lists some volunteer opportunities. And there have been some interesting projects that have been floated in those channels recently. Okay, and I'll just finally put one last plug for my project here, which is I'm the chair of the Good Docs project currently. And this is a community of about 50 software engineers and technical writers who are devoted to making software documentation better. And we're all about creating the tools and the templates that are going to improve documentation in open source and beyond. What has been really magical about being a part of this project is we have technical writers who are experienced, but also people who are brand new coming into the field. And we have lots of opportunities where these experienced and new technical writers meet together to get mentorship. To mentor and be mentored. And I've watched so many magical mentorship opportunities come up throughout this project. Like earlier this week, I was watching a senior UX designer mentoring a new UX designer in our project. My heart was super warmed by it, and it was just lovely. So if you would love a welcoming community that is here to mentor technical writers into the field, we'll be happy to accept you. So that's it for me.
I'd like to suggest I don't know if they actually really need technical writers, but they certainly value them, and that's the Django project, which has documentation that's praised universally, and so obviously they value it, and they're continually working and adding things, so they probably could use some help. And if you go over there, you'll see some stuff that's really worth looking at and emulating.
Great. Yeah, thank you for all the suggestions. This was a very important and also yeah, very lively discussion. And next up we have staying current with in-demand technology. So the first question that we got here was talking about technical writing with a docs as code approach. I guess this is less of a question and more of a, let's just talk about this.
I love it, love it, love it, love it.
Can you expand on
docs
that?
as code.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think docs as code refers to the idea of static websites where you keep the source in a Git repository, say, something like that. And there are lots of examples and ways to learn how to do that. Going to Tom Johnson's website or blog is probably the best one. I'd rather be writing.
Yeah, I mean, docs as code is one of the, yeah, like I came into this industry not knowing like what like the best way to go about developer documentation is, especially when you like have a consistently like a high ratio of like dev to writer. Like docs as code is just one of the most scalable solutions, and I have been doing that at my company. Like it's sort of finally starting to come to fruition. I'm very excited about finally like adopting docs as code our technical writing workflow. I mean, yeah, I guess this is more of a kind of like a topic and less of a question. We should probably move on to like the next one, which kind of is also related to docs as code, which is how often should we explore new documentation tools?
How often should we what?
Explore new documentation tools.
Two questions came in kind of related to each other. So I think part of it was about how do we learn docs as code and docs as code related tools. And then the other part was how often should we be checking out other documentation tools, or like, is it okay to just commit to your tool stack and stick with it?
I can give my 2 pennies on that if anyone cares, but I think that the question how often we should explore new documentation tools can be linked to the current needs of the company. If your company, for example, starts out small and you're happy with a docs as code approach and you don't need anything fancy and the static website, for example, is all you need, then yeah, stay with docs as code, use the pipeline, use those site generators that work with your that satisfy the needs of your project, basically. And I think the best time to look for something else is when you run into problems all the time, or if the workflow is very annoying or cumbersome, or if your project grew and you just have to develop content for different audiences or want to deliver it in a different way, which I think are more advanced topics and probably not topics that a new technical writer needs to solve right away. So I would tie how often to the demands. And if the demands are met by what you have, I don't think that you necessarily need to be looking.
Yeah, I think it's true that tools shouldn't drive what you're doing. It should be the other way around. It's your needs should drive your search for tools.
Great points. Cool. Yeah, we're kind of running short on time. Let's move on to the last topic. Very exciting one of the most voted topic, compensation negotiation. We have one question that is like kind of tangentially related, which is more about career growth. So what makes a technical writer's resume stronger for senior roles as they advance in their career? I'm very interested in this question.
I find that the senior writers in my company are usually the people that do technical writing plus something. So I think I was considered to have that extra something because I have a localization background. And similarly, other technical writers with a very strong like technical background or like a JIRA background, it kind of gives them the more ways that they can contribute to the company. And I really think, yeah, it's not just about technical writing sometimes.
Great points. Yeah, I think taking on additional responsibility is definitely like a way to like show initiative. Like if you can have that be reflecting your resume, I'm sure that's like always looked well upon.
And I think for older writers like me, you really need to be aware of what your value proposition is. And the value proposition for an older writer is not necessarily the same as for a 20-something. We're more likely to be compensated for our judgment and wisdom than we are for our speed at turning out help pages.
Good. Thanks. And I think Stephen chimed in the chat saying my wife is a tech writer and in her latest job has become the data queen. It's making her worth much more. I was wondering, Stephen, so by becoming the data queen, does she like learn like data more, or was she already like she just became much more of an expert? So basically, like instead of acquiring new skills, like becoming the expert on like something that's important to the position. Picking up as she goes because nobody else was doing it. That's very cool. Yeah, does anyone else has suggestions for advancing careers? Resume stronger. Right. Yeah, I think then we can. Oh, go ahead.
Being able to take on different roles, I think, is the best way to learn or to progress in your career. So maybe learn new tools, maybe learn new approaches, like single sourcing or something, and try and apply that to what you do. Try and talk to people within your company to see if you can persuade them to change to what you think is a better value proposition. Maybe change their workflow a little or something like that. Basically, like Charlene says, identify the pain points.
Good. Yeah. And I think like, maybe like this is not something like we don't really also need to like think of technical writing as like a field that's very different from other roles. So like a lot of the stuff that applies to other roles, how you show like how you make your resume stronger, also applies for technical writing. Like trying to like highlight achievements, trying to like propose new initiatives, like and like sort of make achievements on your resume that really show that you are able to push the company forward, organization forward. I think is also a good way to accelerate your advance in your career. Do we have other questions about compensation negotiation?
I think the important thing is to think about how well you fit with the company before you start talking about the price.
How are you? I'm sorry. How well you fare with the company before talking about the price?
Yeah. I mean, don't come into. I mean, I assume we're talking about job hunting here, but we could also be talking about, I suppose, promotions and other things. But basically, when you're interviewing, say, to join a company, put off discussions of the amount of money till after you're really convinced that you want the job and they're convinced they want you.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, we did see some, I think recently in the Slack channel, somebody like trying to negotiate, but ended up actually having the offer rescinded, which is actually really bad on the company's part to have done that to them. But I guess that kind of is illustrates the point that you're trying to make.
Yeah, it's the risk that you take, but then it is also the value you put on your work. So if I have 25 years of experience and somebody is saying, oh yeah, we'll pay you at the beginner rate, I'm going to say no thank you and walk away. Or talk to them and kind of persuade them to try and step up the price, and do not ever only have one offer in hand. The more you can, the more confident you can be that, yeah, I'll get a job. It's not the end of the world if I do this particular job. Given that, it's going to be crappy if for a senior person, they're only paying like, peanuts. Just my 2 cents. I think I've done about 3 of these, so I'd better stop.
Thank you. Yeah, we are about on time here. It's 8 o'clock. Does anyone else want to chime in, like share their perspective on compensation negotiation? If not, we can also like, at the end we usually do either pitches if they're like new people who are like new to the field who like to pitch their profile to everybody here. There are writers, senior writers from hiring committees and possibly recruiters. The stage is yours if you want to give a pitch. And if you have a job opening in your company, there are valuable candidates here. You can share that too. Yeah, otherwise.
I have a lot of posts.
Yes.
But I've shared it earlier and I'll share it again. But I just wanted to say these jobs that I posted aren't the only ones. We have quite a lot of jobs right now. I would say almost 10 openings related to technical writing. And the only problem is they're mostly in Montreal, Canada, other parts of Canada too, and I think one in Paris. So I think most of the people here are in the Bay Area, but if you guys know anyone in Canada, or if you know any places where I can post these jobs to reach a sort of diverse candidate pool in Canada, please let me know. So
Thank you,
far, I
Charlene.
posted on the BIPOC channel on Write the Doc Slack, and that's about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Me in HR helping you find these places to advertise?
Well, HR isn't helping much, and their criteria for diversity is woman, and that's it. So I'm trying to go the extra mile.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
The Seattle, there's something about Pacific Northwest, bloody blah, something. There's a Northwest, used to be a free newspaper and now it's only online. There's one of those. I can send the link when I find it. I know I have the link somewhere.
all right. Cool. Oh, and thank you, Christine. Yeah, like anybody who wants to like connect with other people, feel free to share your LinkedIn in the chat as well.
I shared it a little bit earlier when we were talking about open source, but if anyone is interested in giving a talk in the near future, the PyCascades CFP is open right now. The talks can be about Python or about things that would be useful to people who are writing in Python. And we always hope for a very diverse pool of submissions. So if you want to talk about documenting Python, if you want to talk about Python documentation, if you want to talk about other concepts in organizing information as it relates to software that might be useful to people who are using Python, kind of anything that would be useful to a Python related audience is welcome, even if it's not directly a Python talk itself.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Maggie. I'll definitely check it out. No, I'm just saying I'll check it out. That's all.
Yeah. Thanks everyone. This was a lively event, great discussion, and the recording will be sent out to all the attendees if you wanted to check back. And we'll also be sending out like the resources that we mentioned during this event to all who are RSVP'd. That's it from us. Yeah, feel free to leave. I mean, I guess you could have left anytime, but feel free to leave.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Nice
much.
to see everyone.
Both.
Thank you, guys.